This is The World Today on BBC News. I'm Karen Giannoni. The headlines. President Trump denies writing Jeffrey Epstein a lewd message for his 50th birthday as he orders his Attorney General to seek the release of court documents relating to the sex offender. BBC Verify investigates how Israel has demolished thousands of civilian buildings in Gaza. The EU hits Russia with fresh sanctions, this time shutting off the financial pipeline from its lucrative energy sector. And UK scientists to examine the world's oldest ice sample to help our understanding of climate change. Well, let's return to the Middle East. As we heard there, Israel has been levelling thousands of civilian buildings in Gaza in controlled explosions. The demolitions across the Gaza Strip have ramped up since the ceasefire ended in March, particularly in Rafah, a city in southern Gaza. BBC Verify's Merlin Thomas has this report.
21 months of war has ravaged Gaza. Homes, streets, parks once bustling with life, now in ruins. Since the ceasefire ended, demolitions by Israeli forces and contractors have ramped up, levelling large swathes of Rafah. This was Tell al-Sultan, one of Rafah city's most vibrant neighbourhoods, in May. Weeks later, Israeli demolition has levelled it, with only the maternity hospital left standing. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz announced plans to create a so-called humanitarian city here for 2 million Palestinians to live in. It's been widely condemned and compared to a concentration camp by a former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert. Controlled explosions, excavators and bulldozers have obliterated whole areas of the remnants of the once bustling region. BBC Verify identified footage of infrastructure being demolished in 40 locations since the ceasefire ended in March. Tower blocks, schools and civilian buildings reduced to rubble. BBC Verify also identified dozens of ads posted on Israeli Facebook groups offering demolition work in Gaza to contractors, offering special projects in excellent conditions in areas controlled by the IDF.
The Israeli army says it operates in accordance with international law, that Hamas concealed military assets in civilian areas, and that property destruction is only when deemed a military necessity. But legal experts say these demolitions may violate international law.
Destroying enemy property in an occupied territory without imperative military necessity is a war crime. The expectation that Hamas may return to a neighborhood would not meet the standard of imperative military necessity. It is too speculative. And when entire neighborhoods get leveled, this simply raises the suspicion that the standard used here for deciding what is necessary or militarily useful is lower than what the law demands.
When the long-awaited ceasefire comes, for those who return, only ruins and the memory of what once was will remain. Merlin Thomas, BBC News.
Staying in the Middle East, two of the most senior Christian leaders in the Holy Land have travelled to Gaza. It comes after an incident in which Israeli fire killed 3 people at the territory's only Catholic church. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel deeply regrets the loss of life in his words, mistaken strike, as he put it, and blamed stray ammunition. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which oversees the church, condemned the shelling as an attack on civilians and a sacred place. Ukraine is to receive fresh American weaponry following this week's decision by the Trump administration to allow European NATO members to buy US equipment and then deliver it to Kyiv. But 3.5 years after Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine remains outgunned and outmanned. As a result, the country's resorted to unusual ways to motivate its weary troops and keep them supplied with new equipment. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams reports from Kyiv.
The images come in every day, thousands of them, men and equipment being hunted down on the front lines. Everything filmed, logged, counted. In this uneven battle against Russia, Ukraine is using data in novel ways. Drone units have been filming their exploits since the war began, the footage fed back to Kyiv for analysis. And now, for every confirmed hit, the units get points, and points mean prizes. In an anonymous office in the capital, analysts pore over the footage, verify each hit and award points to the unit responsible. We've been asked not to reveal the location or any names.
Different amount of E-points goes for the different categories, right?
Yes.
So if
it might sound like a video game, but it's deadly serious. A killed Russian soldier is worth 6 points, but one who surrenders is much more valuable, a bargaining chip for the future.
But I show you this one.
This is where we are kill Russians.
I think first and foremost it's about quality data, the mathematics of war and understanding how to use limited resources more effectively. But it's also about motivation. When we change the point values, we can see how motivation changes.
For Ukraine's frontline troops fighting this long, grinding war, this is a significant innovation. We've been in contact with a dozen brigades to find out what the soldiers themselves think of the new scheme. We got some interesting replies. In general, my comrades and I are positive, says Volodymyr. This is a way to make up for what we lose, while inflicting losses on the enemy as effectively as possible. But a soldier who calls himself Snake isn't convinced. The fundamental issue of motivation isn't resolved by this. Points won't stop people fleeing from the military. But most frontline units seem pleased with the new system.
They haven't been running for very long, these point-based programs. But once we figured out how it works, it turned out to be quite a decent system. Our lads are worn out, and nothing really motivates them anymore. But this system helps. It's something that keeps you moving forward.
Points for kills. It sounds brutal, even callous. But this is war, and Ukraine is determined to hold on by fighting as effectively and efficiently as it can. Paul Adams, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, the European Union has agreed more sanctions against Russia over its war against Ukraine, targeting its financial and energy sectors. The UK has announced it will be joining the EU in the sanctions, with the Foreign Secretary David Lammy saying they aim to strike at the heart of Russia's energy sector. The price cap on Russian crude oil will be slashed to just over $47 per barrel. President Zelensky's hailed the new sanctions as essential and timely. The UK has also announced new sanctions on 3 units of Russia's military intelligence, the GRU, and 18 of its officers, naming them publicly online. Some of the alleged spies are accused of involvement in the attack on a theatre sheltering civilians in Mariupol in Ukraine at the start of the invasion. Now, a sample of the world's oldest ice has arrived in the UK after a team of scientists worked in temperatures of -35°C to extract it. It's thought the sample from East Antarctica could be 1.5 million years old or even older. It'll now be studied to help us better understand the history of the Earth's climate. Our science editor Rebecca Morell has more.
Yes. Extracted from deep beneath Antarctica. A core of ice, the oldest that's ever been collected, and it holds a unique record going back more than 1 million years. Now the ancient ice has arrived at the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge. There are 190 pieces, each a metre long, kept at -23 degrees in the freezer.
This is the most precious sample because what we've actually got out on the bench in front of us is the oldest ever ice core. So we're hoping that this record is going to actually go back at least 1.2 million years, hopefully 1.5, but it could actually be even older.
The scientists set up camp in East Antarctica, drilling the ice cores from a depth of 2.8 kilometres over a period of 4 years. It needed painstaking precision.
The only way you can find out what's in this ice is to melt it. This piece here contains about 20,000 years of history. So by melting it incredibly slowly, millimetre by millimetre, you can find out how the world was changing over time.
The ice will reveal variations in temperature, snowfall and even wind patterns. The tiny bubbles inside give a snapshot of the carbon dioxide levels. Working from the youngest ice to the very oldest will reconstruct the Earth's climate history and help scientists understand the changes we're seeing today.
The concentration of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere today are higher than at any time in the last 800,000 years. So we know we're in an unusual climate period. And essentially, as much information as we can provide about how the climate has changed in the past is going to improve our predictions.
It will take about 7 weeks to melt and study the precious samples. Once they're gone, they're gone. But it's a chance to unlock the deepest secrets held in Antarctica's ancient ice. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. The US network CBS has announced it's cancelling The Late Show with Stephen Colbert from May next year and will retire The Late Show entirely after a 33-year run. Colbert, who's hosted the talk show since 2015, announced the decision in last night's recording, saying he'd been given the news the previous night.
It's not just the end of our show, but it's the end of The Late Show on CBS. I'm not being replaced. This is all just going away.
Well, it comes just a few days after Colbert criticised parent company Paramount for settling a lawsuit with Donald Trump for $16 million over Donald Trump's claim that CBS News deceptively edited an interview with the then presidential candidate Kamala Harris.
My parent corporation, Paramount, paid Donald Trump a $16 million settlement over his 60 Minutes lawsuit. As someone who has always been a proud employee of this network, I am offended. And I don't know if anything will ever repair my trust in this company. But just taking a stab at it, I'd say $16 million would help.
Last night, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren put out a post on X, which included that clip saying, "America deserves to know if his show was cancelled for political reasons." Both Colbert and Elizabeth Warren have linked the timing of that settlement to a merger between Paramount Global and Skydance Media worth an estimated $28 billion, which Donald Trump would be required to sign off on. In a joint statement, the network said, "We consider Stephen Colbert irreplaceable and will retire the Late Show franchise at that time. We are proud that Stephen called CBS home. He and the broadcast will be remembered in the pantheon of greats that graced late-night TV." This is purely a financial decision against a challenging backdrop in late night. It's not related in any way to the show's performance, content, or other matters happening at Paramount. Well, let's talk to KJ Matthews, an entertainment journalist, joining me from LA. KJ, good to see you. How much of a surprise was this sudden pulling of the show?
I think it was still a surprise. You know, I would say that out of all the three late night talk show hosts here in America on ABC, NBC, and CBS, that's Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel, and then there's Stephen Colbert, he has been the most critical of the Trump administration for some time now. But I think that people had gotten used to him, you know, picking on Trump, and that's just kind of the way it was. So for Stephen Colbert to come out the other night and say that he only found out that his show was being canceled really 24 hours ago was shocking. That there wasn't some sort of warning or discussion or talks, that they just said, you know, we're ending the entire show and, you know, your 200 member staff will have to look for new jobs. I think that was surprising for sure.
So a lot of suspicion around the motives for this. The networks insist this was not political, this is financial, but Stephen Colbert was performing very well. It was still very, very popular, wasn't it? Isn't it? It was
very popular. He's the lead. He really was the leading primetime late night host. His ratings were higher than the other two's. However, there's something to say about that. his show still was not that profitable because it takes so much money to put on these late night talk shows that it didn't really outweigh what they were bringing in. So it had not been profitable for some time, although it did get the highest ratings. And so I think a lot of people are saying, yes, late night shows, aren't making as much money as they used to because of streaming and whatnot. But the timing of the ending of this show is suspect because the parent company, CBS being owned by Paramount, they're in discussion talks to merge with Skydance. And of course, they need the Trump administration and the FCC to sign off on that. So people are questioning it. You just mentioned Elizabeth Warren and other people are wondering whether the timing is suspicious.
KJ, just tell us why, if people aren't familiar necessarily with Stephen Colbert, why is he such an institution?
He really is such an institution. Remember, the late night show has already been on for about 30 years. He took it over from someone else, obviously. So he's only been at that show for, I think, 2015. So he only really been there for 10 years. But during that time, he was known for being one of the most really deep and intellectual hosts out there. He brought on people who were trending in the headlines. Sometimes they were celebrities, sometimes they weren't, but whoever were like newsmakers, and they would really get into deep conversations. And a lot of people that had books to promote or things that weren't, comedy in nature, loved coming on his show, loved knowing that they would be able to come on his show and have a 10-minute, maybe 15-minute talk uninterrupted to promote their agenda or to promote things that were happening around the world that were news makers. So, he will really, really, really be missed for sure. I mean, just the other night he had on a politician from California, Adam Schiff, and they talked about the merger and Trump and how they thought that Trump was really trying to shut down a lot of members of the media and journalism in general. So it was interesting to have that platform and to have people challenge the current administration. So I'm sure he will definitely be missed on the late night, landscape for sure.
Yeah, I wonder where his career will take him next. KJ Matthews, thank you very much, entertainment journalist, joining me from Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Now, the Austrian extreme sports pioneer Felix Baumgartner, who broke the world record for the highest skydive by jumping from the edge of space, has died in a paragliding accident in Italy. Police say he fell to the ground near a hotel swimming pool. Simon Jones looks back at his life.
When you are there on top of the world and you stand there, you finally realize this is a very quiet moment,
Known as Fearless Felix, Baumgartner said you need to go up really high to realize how small you are, breaking a world record as well as the sound barrier in 2012 for the highest ever skydive, described as the most fantastic jump that's ever been made, falling from more than 128,000 feet up in the stratosphere. A jump that went into a violent spin before the relief of the landing and a chance to reflect.
When I was standing there on top of the world, you become so humble, you do not think about breaking records anymore.
This was a man who loved to leap. One of his earliest records was in 1999 for the world's lowest base jump from the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro. And in 2003, he completed a flight across the English Channel, sporting a specially made jumpsuit with carbon fibre wings, travelling at more than 200 miles per hour. He died paragliding in Italy, falling to the ground near the swimming pool of a hotel. Reports suggested he may have had a medical issue mid-air. But he'll be remembered for wowing the world with his breathtaking sense of adventure, which he described as total freedom. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Let's talk to Luke Akins, who was Felix's skydiving consultant and coach on that sound barrier-breaking Stratos jump. And Luke, thank you for waiting to talk to us. We are sorry for your loss. Tell us about Felix and what he was like to work with.
Felix was such an interesting guy. When I met him, I didn't know what to expect because in our world of skydiving and aerial stuff, he had kind of set the bar. When I met him, what struck me the most about Felix is that he was striving for perfection and always pushing his team to excel and do things that had never been done before.
He did things that most people would have found terrifying, but he had a very methodical way of doing them. He wasn't doing them recklessly, as some people might think that you have to be to do these sorts of dangerous sports.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot because being involved with Felix on this project, the Stratos one in particular, people say daredevil and all that. Everything's calculated. He was a risk taker, but he mitigated the risk down to something that was acceptable. And I learned some of that stuff from Felix, was that we're going to take some risks, but we're going to do it calculated. We're going to do baby steps and work our way up to do something that seems incredible.
Yeah, so you were brought in to take photos with him initially on jumps, and then you turned towards leading the team on parachutes. So you really worked very closely with him. What was he like in those very tense moments before these jumps?
Felix was an intense guy just to start with. To do some of these things, there's either two ways to go. You're either the laughy, kind of make jokes to ease the tension, or you're very serious. And Felix ran that very serious line. He was intense, violent, making everybody perform up to their top level. He said if he's going to take this risk, he wants us all to perform at the same level. He also wasn't afraid to cut loose and have some fun sometimes. I got to do a lot of stuff with him throughout our relationship through Red Bull, and traveled the world and had some great times.
Yeah, I bet. It was a world gripping event in 2012 when he broke the world record for the world's highest skydive. And what was his life like after that? Because he was a household name.
Felix he strived for that. I mean, we all do these things because we want to have a great time and do stuff, but also the notoriety. And Felix definitely enjoyed the notoriety. He was kind of on the nice road. That's why this comes as a little bit of a shock to me, because he had done these risky things, and now he's just paragliding. He's flying the helicopter in air shows for Red Bull. He's kind of on the backside of the dangerous part of his career, and to have made it through all of that and have something happen, it just goes to show you never know when it's your time, and take advantage of all the time we have together.
Yeah, absolutely. And what did he used to say to you about the dangers of the kind of sports that he enjoyed? What was his attitude towards the risk?
It sounds funny to say, but he was actually very conservative. I was trying to get him to push the edge of some of the training stuff that we were doing, and he definitely liked to rail it back in. On the outside, when it was game day, he was all up for pushing the limit to the edge, but he didn't see the need for senseless risks. So when we were training, he was very methodical and sometimes was more conservative than people would think.
And what sort of reaction has there been across the world of extreme sport, these sorts of attempts? What are people saying today about Felix and the way that this ended?
No real comment on the way it ended because we don't know all the details yet. But there's been tons of the community. Is a very small community at the top of the extreme sports world, and everybody's communicating. I'm getting lots of messages of condolences, and goes out to his mom and his dad and his family, which I got to know over the years. And the whole community feels a loss when something like this happens, especially to an icon of our sport.
And we send our condolences to you and the community. Luke, thank you very much. Luke Aikins, professional skydiver and aerial coordinator, joining us from Seattle to talk about Felix Baumgartner. Now, here in London, we're getting all set for a summer of music as the first night of the Proms gets underway at the Royal Albert Hall. 8 weeks of world-class music from leading orchestras, conductors and soloists from across the UK will be showcased in the annual series of concerts held from today until September. This year's highlights include Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture, Bliss's Birthday Fanfare and the world premiere of a piece by composer Erilyn Wallen called The Elements. Well, let's talk to our reporter, Emma McCarthy, who's outside the Royal Albert Hall. How is it looking, Emma? How much anticipation?
Well, Karen, you can see behind me that everyone has really gone inside now, except for a few stragglers that are making their way in, as the first night of the Proms is about to get underway here at Royal Albert Hall. It's a beautiful night for it as well here in central London. It's been full to the brim of so many people from so many different ages, and that's really what the Proms is all about. It's about bringing world-class classical music to as many people as possible. If you can believe it, Karen, it's now in its 130th year. Not doing too bad for a 130-year anniversary. And we have been speaking to people here who've come all the way from Germany, who've come from across Europe to take part in an event that is so quintessentially British and quintessentially part of the British summertime. So 8 weeks, 86 concerts to be held here at the Royal Albert Hall and across the UK as well. So there's really something for everyone, Karen.
And briefly, Emma, as you mentioned, you don't have to be some kind of classical music expert or rich to attend the proms. This really is for everyone.
Absolutely, with tickets starting from £8 to be here in Royal Albert Hall. There's not many things in London that come for £8 anymore. So there's not only that, there's also a wide range of music as well. If you're a reality TV show fan, there's going to be the first ever Traitor Prom as well next week. So something for everyone here over the next 8 weeks. Karen?
Emma, thank you very much on a lovely warm evening there outside the Albert Hall with everybody now inside. For the first night of the proms, I'll be back in a few minutes' time with more here on BBC News. It's 7 p.m. here in London. This is The World Today with me, Karin Giannoni. President Trump asks for the release of court documents relating to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein amid pressure from his own supporters to share new information. It comes as the Wall Street Journal publishes a lurid birthday message allegedly sent by Donald Trump to Epstein. The president says it's false and is threatening to sue. Sectarian violence in southern Syria displaces nearly 80,000 people, according to the United Nations. A problem with Britain's waterways as serious pollution incidents rise. We speak to a member of the campaign group Surfers Against Sewage. Also coming up on The World Today. After the death of daredevil Felix Baumgartner in Italy, we'll hear from one of the crew who worked his supersonic skydive from the edge of space. Welcome to The World Today, an hour of international news from the BBC. We start with Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein as the US president threatens to sue media tycoon Rupert Murdoch after the Wall Street Journal reported allegations about a lurid birthday card the president's alleged to have sent Epstein in 2003 before the financier was charged with sex crimes. According to the paper, it contains a message framed by the outline of a naked woman, which appears to be hand-drawn with a heavy marker. The typewritten note, styled as an imaginary conversation between Trump and Epstein, ends with the words, "A pal is a wonderful thing, happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." Well, before that development, Donald Trump posted this on his Truth Social platform. Based on the ridiculous amount of publicity given to Jeffrey Epstein, I've asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to produce any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. During his presidential campaign, Trump promised to release files relating to Epstein and has faced increased pressure from his own supporters to share new information. His Attorney General, Pam Bondi, says they are ready to unseal grand jury transcripts on Friday, but it could take some time for a judge to release the documents. And it's not entirely clear what documents, if any, would be involved. So, what do we know about how Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein knew each other? Mr. Trump's relationship with Epstein began in the late 80s and spanned 2 decades, when they were frequently seen together at parties like this one at the president's home in Florida, Mar-a-Lago, in 1992. Over the next few years, Mr. Trump flew on Epstein's private jet several times, and in 2000, Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's victims, claimed she'd been recruited at Mar-a-Lago as a teenager. 2 years later, Donald Trump told New York Magazine, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He likes beautiful women as much as I do, many of them on the younger side." But in 2004, the pair fell out, competing over a Palm Beach mansion. Mr. Trump later claimed they never spoke again. My colleague Sumi Somaskanda is in Washington. She says the story is still getting a lot of attention.
It is clear that the president is still not very happy with the continued attention that this story is getting. You mentioned the comments that he made on Truth Social, saying that he had directed his Attorney General Pam Bondi to release some of the files related to Jeffrey Epstein grand jury testimony. And he said, as you showed there in that post, that was based on the, quote, ridiculous amount of attention this case is getting. Today, we've seen him post again on Truth Social. I'll tell you what he said. He said, if there was a smoking gun on Epstein, why didn't the Dems, who controlled the files for 4 years and had Garland and Comey in charge, use it? Because they had nothing. He's referring there to the former Attorney General Merrick Garland and the former FBI Director James Comey. It just goes to show that the president really has not only showed his frustration, but changed his messaging of the last 10 days or so. We've seen this story dominate the headlines here in the U.S. You know, in the beginning, in the first few days, we saw President Trump say this story is boring. It's not a story. Jeffrey Epstein, he said, was the man who never dies. And he said it's time for his Republican supporters to move on. We then saw that post over the past weekend where he said he no longer wanted some of those in his MAGA coalition to be his supporters because of their attention to this story, which, as I said, he says is a non-story. Then we saw him blame Democrats, saying it's a Democrat hoax, tying it to former President Obama. He's tied it to Hillary Clinton and other figures. Of course, we should say there is no evidence of that. But we come back to this moment where President Trump appears to be giving in a little bit to this pressure, saying that some files will be released. But important to say, Karen, these files are not those that many of his supporters and those who've been calling for these files to be released want to see. And grand jury testimony could take quite some time to be released.
And Sumi, some pretty strong threats by Donald Trump to the Wall Street Journal reporting this note and its owner, Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, indeed. And this was really interesting. And I should say here in Washington, Karen, there was a lot of anticipation for this report from the Wall Street Journal. Reporters around the city waiting for this article to be published, especially as we heard that the White House had contacted Rupert Murdoch to say they do not want this story published. Now President Trump saying it is false, malicious, and defamatory. He called the Wall Street Journal and the story a pile of garbage and said he would see Rupert Murdoch in court, essentially. Now, the Wall Street Journal is standing behind its the reporters rather are standing behind their story. They are saying that this information is true. But on the other hand, you have seen both the president and his son, Donald Trump Jr., saying, look, this supposed letter that Donald Trump sent Jeffrey Epstein is not even his style. Donald Trump Jr. saying, my father doesn't speak that way. Donald Trump, the president, saying, I don't draw, because this letter apparently included a drawn figure of a naked woman. All of this is just continuing to raise attention and interest in the story, Karen, and it just goes to show again that it is not one that is easy for the Trump administration or the president to push out of the headlines.
Sumi Somaskanda in Washington. Well, there's much more from Sumi on her podcast, The President's Path. You can scan the QR code on the side of your screen to get a link to that. It's also on the BBC News channel here at 23:30 UK time, 18:30 Eastern time. And Sumi will be back in the next hour on The Context with Ben Brown. Now, Katy Balls is Washington editor and columnist of The Times and The Sunday Times, and she wrote a piece called Why Won't MAGA Let Trump Ignore His Epstein Problem? Here's what she had to say on the answer to that.
I think there's a few aspects to the answer, but effectively, the Epstein scandal runs deep in the Make America Great Again movement. Many of Trump's most loyal supporters have long seen Jeffrey Epstein as almost a case test in a lack of transparency into their issues with what they see as the deep state in Washington, a deep state that they've often felt has been against Donald Trump and their movement. And therefore they expected, when Donald Trump returned to the White House, for there to be a release of the files, for there to be transparency. And I think there's a lot of anguish and disappointment that this hasn't happened. And that is what we've seen spilling out. And it's also why 2 weeks since the Department of Justice and the FBI said effectively there's nothing to see here, Donald Trump cannot, for love or money, get people to stop talking about Jeffrey Epstein. He says he's bored of it. His base are not.
Right, so telling people to stop talking about it has done anything but stop them talking about it. So, Katy, this was active for MAGA and Donald Trump supporters when President Biden was in the White House, and it was in their interest to accuse the administration of carrying out a cover-up, but it's not working out quite so well now that Donald Trump is in control.
Exactly, because you now have a situation where Donald Trump during the election campaign was asked about the Epstein files and suggested he was in favour of releasing more information. Even further than that, several of his appointments, Kash Patel to the FBI, his deputy, they have previously spoken about some of these Epstein conspiracy theories, suggesting that something was off, that the authorities were not telling the truth. And Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has gone on Fox News as Attorney General and suggested that this so-called client list, which was one of the things that figures in MAGA talk a lot about, this idea that's been denied of a list of clients that Epstein kept, was on her desk, only to then say there's no client list. So now this group is saying, well, you've almost whipped up the base to be expecting these things, only to now have to turn around and try and quell the flames and say that, you know, there isn't actually anything after all. So lots of words and statements and actions are coming back to haunt both Donald Trump and his key members of his team when it comes to the expectation amongst his core base.
And we've heard Donald Trump so angry at his own side for this. How much of a headache, I suppose that's not a particularly strong term, but much worse is this for Donald Trump and his administration? Is this being seen as the first visible sign of vulnerability in this second term?
I think it is beginning to be seen as that, because we have seen since Donald Trump has returned in a very powerful position, he has managed to bend his party to his will on lots of issues that they are not naturally that comfortable with. Tariffs, there's been some kickback from traditional Republicans. Intervention in Iran, there's been a kickback from the MAGA movement. More support from Ukraine than some in MAGA would like. But that has so far, he has used his authority to do. I think this is one of the first issues where he has said, hey guys, we're moving on, and the base has said, no, we're not. And that suggests that he is having a bigger issue here, I think, than elsewhere. And the question is, how does Donald Trump now try and turn the page on it? We know that he has had a change of tune overnight in saying that Pam Bondi, his attorney general, is going to see if a judge will release some of the information, some of the files. Now lots of people are saying, oh, that is coming. If it doesn't, I think there's just going to be more and more pressure on Donald Trump to do something here. And it does make it more complicated that he did have this previous friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, he cut that off some time ago, but it makes it a bit harder to say he is a neutral actor here when lots of his supporters suspect something has gone wrong in terms of transparency.
That's Katy Balls, Washington editor of The Times. The United Nations Human Rights Office has urged Syria's interim government to end the violence there, with aid agencies also pleading for stability. The UN estimates nearly 80,000 people have been displaced. It comes as sectarian clashes between Arab Bedouin tribes and Druze militia have renewed in southern Syria. Local people around Suwaida have described bodies being strewn in the streets, as well as summary executions. The clashes drew in Israel. It bombed both Damascus and Syrian forces in Suwaida. Israel says it's acting to protect the minority Druze community and its own national security. Almost 600 people have been killed since sectarian violence erupted on Sunday. The Druze religion is an offshoot of Shia Islam with its own unique identity and beliefs. I spoke to our correspondent in Damascus, Lina Sinjab, to get the latest on the violence in Suwaida.
Well, I've been talking to some people inside Suwaida, and it's relatively calming down. There are still the situation of the tribal fighters who are surrounding the city, sometimes advancing into one village, at the time withdrawing from this village, and they can see here lots of clashes happening at that front. But so far there hasn't been any confirmation that they've managed to advance to anywhere near the city center. We've heard also from the Israelis saying that they're given the Syrian security forces a 48-hour window to enter Suwaida so that they maintain stability and security. But until the moment, we haven't heard anything from the Syrian government, whether confirming they are going in or not. Although some journalists who are close to the government are saying that government forces are preparing to enter Suwaida again, but we are waiting to see real movement on the ground.
And Lina, what is this violence doing to all those hopes that under its new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, Syria would be turning a new page?
Well, these are leaving lots of disappointments and frustration among many, not only the Druze or the minority. This sectarian violence that especially happened against the Druze, many of them are saying we've revolted against Assad. We never held weapon against Syrian people. We didn't take part in in the war of Assad, against all the opposition in the past 14 years. Yet we're paying a price because of a hatred message that's coming mainly from some Islamist jihadists that are part of the government, or the others, like from the tribals of the Bedouins who have attacked them. Of course, there has been, clashes between the two sides. The groups that support the, Druze leader Al-Hajri, that the government here accuses of supporting Israel and calling on Israel to interfere. These are the ones who are clashing with the rebel fighters with the tribal fighters, but actually at the end 600 have been killed. Many women and children have been killed. Innocent men who had nothing to do with the fighting have been killed. And the trust...
Ina Sinjab in Damascus. So why is Israel getting involved? I spoke to Ibrahim Al-Asil from the Atlantic Council to get more context.
Because Israel is a very important factor in what's happening in Syria. Since the fall of the Assad regime on December 8th of last year, Israel started a massive aerial campaign against what was left of the Syrian army there. The rationale of the Israelis was that they want to take things into their own hands and they don't want to trust any upcoming Syrian government about their own security. But that didn't stop there. Syria and Israel had a war in 1973. In 1974, there was a disengagement agreement. Israel violated this agreement, occupied the buffer zone, and then occupied even beyond the buffer zone and continued over 100 airstrikes and artillery strikes on Syria. Today, clearly, Israel sees a potential ally in the Druze, and that's one of the motivation behind their intervention in Syria.
Now, you're in Washington. Do we get a sense of what the Trump administration's stance is likely to be on this? Is there likely to be involvement by the US? Do we know what they think?
That's indeed a very important point because it's at odds with the Israeli perspective when we compare the American policy and the Israeli policy. From the Israeli side, they want to keep Damascus weak and they want to keep Syria fragmented. However, from the American side and the stated policy and the policy that the US administration has been pursuing is to give Syria a chance and to support the current Syrian government in unifying Syria and consolidating power. Now, clearly, there is a divergence between the Israelis and the Americans, and there is a need for more channels of communications between them to work towards that, because if Syria collapses, if there is further instability inside Syria, that there is a huge potential for that to spill over and destabilize the region further.
Ibrahim Al-Asil from the Atlantic Council. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. There's been a systemic failure to tackle pollution in England's rivers with persistent underinvestment by some water and sewage companies. That's the damning verdict of the Environment Agency, which says serious pollution incidents have risen by 60% in the last year alone. MPs say the regulator Ofwat and the Environment Agency itself have failed to hold water companies to account. Here's Jonah Fisher.
A serious pollution incident is one which has a significant or lasting impact on the natural environment. It could be harmful to humans or lead to a large number of fish dying, like in this incident in Cambridgeshire last September. The Environment Agency report out today shows that in 2024, the number of serious incidents leapt by 60% to 75 from 47. Three water companies, Thames, Southern and Yorkshire, were responsible for the vast majority of them. The incidents, which mostly involved raw sewage being discharged, are, according to the EA, the result of years of underinvestment and are a systemic failure. On the banks of the River Kennet in Wiltshire, they've been complaining about spills for more than a decade.
So this is an example of failing infrastructure. This manhole here, when it's wet, so much sewage comes down this pipe that the manhole lid is forced off and we get untreated sewage spewing underneath the boardwalk across the bridge and into the river.
So who do you blame for this mess?
I think the blame is equally government water companies. You know, I think it was a societal mess, and we need to find ways of moving forward from it, because at the moment we get in this endless loop where each party is blaming the other.
The regulators are under mounting pressure to show they can make the private water companies act in the public interest. Now, in this report, the Environment Agency says it's inspected more than 4,000 water company assets in the last year and found that nearly a quarter of them were in breach of their permits. That's rule-breaking, law-breaking on a massive scale.
It's a complete disgrace what's happened, and people have every right to be furious about it. I'm furious about what's happened, and it is clear that regulation isn't working effectively. We've also managed to get £104 billion of investment into the sector, because fundamentally, if we want to stop pollution, we need to invest in improving the infrastructure, which has been left to just fall apart over the last 14 years.
Water UK, which represents the water companies, also blamed the regulators, and in particular Ofwat, for, it says, preventing them from investing more. Next week, water and sewage will be centre stage once more as a government-backed review of the industry's failings and recommendations of how to fix it is published.
Well, let's speak to Henry Swithinbank from the campaign group Surfers Against Sewage. Henry, thank you for being with us. I suppose based on your experiences in the past year, seeing a massive increase in these figures isn't a huge surprise to you.
No, it's not. We're frankly not surprised at all by what water companies are now doing. This is a tale of as old as time, and simply we're hearing about more and more pollution from this frankly broken system.
These are the figures from last year. It did rain an awful lot.
It did, but even the Environment Agency in their report have come out and said that the water companies can no longer blame this weather. This is a systemic failing caused by a water system that is fundamentally set up to deliver profit for the water companies. And whilst that remains the case, we will be stuck in this loop of pollution. So what we really want to see from the Commission next week and from the government is to completely replumb this system so that the water system works for the public benefit, not for private interest.
So the problem at the moment is the structure, the way that our wastewater is processed. When it rains heavily, sewage ends up in rivers and ends up in the sea.
Yes, so our Victorian infrastructure has been created so it combines rainwater and sewage, and it just hasn't been updated to connect to the amount of new houses being built, but also from the increased rainfall. But that can't still be an excuse. Actually, what we've seen is just an investment into dividends, into debt, rather than into infrastructure.
Now, the water companies say things are going to get better because they're going to invest billions in infrastructure, in new infrastructure, now that they've been allowed to put up consumers' bills.
Yes, but we think we've heard this before. They keep on telling us we're going to invest and invest. And the figures today actually showed that, yes, they have been investing, but we're still getting the same result. So we think them pouring this 104 billion into these same leaky pipes is just going to result in the same issues unless we remove that profit motive and restructure the water companies to work for public benefit.
Right, so you're talking about a complete restructure of the way the whole water system's run. I mean, we have seen 6 water companies banned last month from giving their bosses bonuses if they don't meet environmental standards, etc. But I just want to ask you about what people are facing, because obviously the summer holidays just beginning and people are heading to rivers, heading to the sea. What is your advice to people to make sure they don't come into contact with disgusting stuff that's going to do us harm?
So we have at Surfers Against Sewage, have the Safer Seas and Rivers Service app, which gives you live alerts for when sewage is being discharged. So you can check that and see if it's safe to go in the water. We at Surfers Against Sewage are surfers, we're water users, we're swimmers, we're paddleboarders. We love being in the water and we want to be able to use that freely. So we encourage people to go in the water, but just to check that app to make sure you're not going to become sick when you do enter the water.
Henry, thank you very much. Henry Swithenbank from Surfers Against Sewage. Thank you. Just some of the day's other news now. Police say no further action will be taken against the Belfast rap band Kneecap over their performance at Glastonbury. A senior detective had been looking into whether a criminal offence had taken place during their performance. Police have searched the home and the headquarters of the former Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro. Mr. Bolsonaro has been ordered to wear an ankle bracelet to prevent him fleeing. He's on trial accused of plotting a coup against his successor, which he denies. There's a lot more coming up here on The World Today. I am Karen Giannoni here in London. I'll be back with plenty more in a few minutes' time. See you soon. You're with The World Today on BBC News. I'm Karen Giannoni. The headlines. President Trump has asked for the release of court documents relating to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein amid pressure from his own supporters to share new information. BBC Verify investigates how Israel has demolished thousands of civilian buildings in Gaza. And UK scientists are to examine the world's oldest ice sample to help our understanding of climate change. Well, let's return to the Middle East. As we heard there, Israel has been levelling thousands of civilian buildings in Gaza in controlled explosions. The demolitions across the Gaza Strip have ramped up since the ceasefire ended in March, particularly in Rafah, a city in southern Gaza. BBC Verify's Merlin Thomas has this report.
21 months of war has ravaged Gaza. Homes, streets, parks once bustling with life, now in ruins. Since the ceasefire ended, demolitions by Israeli forces and contractors have ramped up, levelling large swathes of Rafah. This was Tel al-Sultan, one of Rafah City's most vibrant neighbourhoods, in May. Weeks later, Israeli demolition has levelled it, with only the maternity hospital left standing. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz announced plans to create a so-called humanitarian city here for 2 million Palestinians to live in. It's been widely condemned and compared to a concentration camp by a former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert. Controlled explosions, excavators and bulldozers have obliterated whole areas of the remnants of the once bustling region. BBC Verify identified footage of infrastructure being demolished in 40 locations since the ceasefire ended in March. Tower blocks, schools and civilian buildings reduced to rubble. BBC Verify also identified dozens of ads posted on Israeli Facebook groups offering demolition work in Gaza to contractors, offering special projects in excellent conditions in areas controlled by the IDF.
The Israeli army says it operates in accordance with international law, that Hamas concealed military assets in civilian areas, and that property destruction is only when deemed a military necessity. But legal experts say these demolitions may violate international law.
Destroying enemy property in an occupied territory without imperative military necessity is a war crime. The expectation that Hamas may return to a neighborhood would not meet the standard of imperative military necessity. It is too speculative. And when entire neighborhoods get leveled, this simply raises the suspicion that the standard used here for deciding what is necessary or militarily useful is lower than what the law demands.
When the long-awaited ceasefire comes, for those who return, only ruins and the memory of what once was will remain. Merlin Thomas, BBC News.
Well, staying in the region, two of the most senior Christian leaders in the Holy Land have travelled to Gaza. It comes after an incident in which Israeli fire killed 3 people at the territory's only Catholic church. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel deeply regrets the loss of life in the mistaken strike, as he put it, and blamed stray ammunition. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which oversees the church, condemned the shelling as an attack on civilians and a sacred place. Ukraine is to receive fresh American weaponry after this week's decision by the Trump administration to allow European NATO members to buy US equipment and then deliver it to Kyiv. But 3.5 years after Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine remains outgunned and outmanned. As a result, the country's resorted to unusual ways to motivate its weary troops and keep them supplied with new equipment. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams reports from Kyiv.
The images come in every day, thousands of them, men and equipment being hunted down on the front.